Hello, fellow book people. Today I'm doing a review of My Friend Dahmer, a 2012 graphic comic memoir by Derf Backderf, who in the 70s grew up with Jeffrey Dahmer, who would become infamous as a serial killer who who killed, then had sex with his victims, chopped them up, some cannibalism, some storage of their items until finally the smell and actually one of his potential victims actually getting free and bringing the cops there to actually investigate resulted in his arrest in 1991. He then subsequently was murdered in prison in 1994. So this book covers basically his time, Derf's association with Dahmer in high school up until like 1978, sort of the end of high school, and also this believe it's the summer afterwards where Dahmer's had his first victim. He killed for the first time. So it's one of these books where graphic novels take me interesting comic books take me interesting places because I'm not big for memoirs, but that's a favorite thing for graphic novels. And I'm really not into true crime. I'm really not a serial killer fascinated kind of guy. But I'd heard about this book, and the really good thing with graphic novels is, yes, I can, because if this had been a full book, this would have been like, okay, I would have been in the Dahmer universe for weeks upon weeks, probably knowing how quickly I go through, and I would just not be able to take that. Versus this, which yes, for regular book two veteran could probably polish it off in an afternoon. It took me a couple of days, and that was all the amount of time I wanted to spend in this world. The thing about Dahmer, like a lot of these serial killers, is his classmates knew that this was a messed up guy. He's never had any friends. They kind of documents his fascination with his roadkill collection. Him collecting dead animals. Finding out subsequently that he was indeed classic serial killer stuff, killing animals, dogs and whatever he could find. Just his odd behavior. He found a weird place as sort of a school mascot, as performing these really bizarre pranks and stunts of pretending to be either epileptic or of doing seizures and stuff like that, of making fun of either his mother or his a decorator that his mother knew, and so and if you get kind of the insensitivity of teenage boys. Derf and his friends formed the Jeffrey Dahmer fan club. And they snuck him into they tried to sneak him into the photographs in the yearbook. But they also had all these Dahmerisms, because he would make these kind of horribly offensive, impressions of someone with epilepsy, with some sort of a spastic sort of a kind of a thing. I'm using that in the offensive air quotes. So, and it's an interesting book in that, I think, like a lot of the thing that I find, like that why I ultimately find serial killers not that interesting. It's interesting because I did a review of Silence of the Lambs, and it's like, Hannibal Lecter is such a fascinating evil kind of personification of evil, whereas you get Dahmer here, and it's he's often portrayed as just this stone-faced figure kind of walking amongst us, which I think in some ways is a part of the fascination of, like, the killers who move amongst us that we don't even realize. But it's always comics are really good actually doing silence, in a way of just a lot of the book is just Dahmer not saying anything, and just that stone-faced flat affect, which that kind of a blankness that then erupts into these uncontrolled impulses. He wants to he's got all these power. He wants to have absolute power over his sexual desires, which are young men. And that part of that is he goes on to drug them, strangle them, and then have sex with the bodies. And yeah, sorry. But it's just like it's not interesting. It's not like the far more interesting thing, I guess, in the book is that Dahmer indeed was all this completely fucked up person right from the beginning, and like the kids around him knew. The kids around him knew that there was something wrong with Dahmer. That he was drinking himself into oblivion a lot, basically self-medicating himself. You get that sense. At least that's. So the part of this book is the only other insights we get of Dahmer is Dahmer actually was one of those rare serial killers who actually talked a lot to things and didn't seem manipulative. So we have the insights or the reportage that we have in here of Dahmer. Actually, some of that actually does come from Dahmer himself on the one side. And so you have to, I really do take that with a large grain of salt. He's going to make his own justifications and his own reasons for what his childhood was like. And indeed, you get a lot of Derf doing a lot of stuff where he's contrasting. Oh, I had my life was nice and stable and I had supportive parents. And it was kind of all my concerns were just sort of the regular kid concerns. Whereas, Dahmer, his mother had had psychological problems and she was taking lots of drugs and she had fits, and speculation of whether those fits were what Dahmer was parroting to his school friends in this book. And it's one of these things that lots of people have parents who have either have their own depressions or psychological issues, who have parents who have bitter divorces, but they don't turn into serial killers. So I don't know if that gave me particularly insight into Dahmer, or just the idea of, there can be that interesting thing of they have with serial killers of Dahmer had this, the first person he killed was over this summer where his mother took his younger brother and they just pissed off, and he was all alone, and his brother and his father was somewhere else and wasn't aware that Dahmer was still at the family house. And you could sort of get that oh God, that was a point where there was nobody there, and that's when he first killed. And then there's a large gap between that and then the next kills, and then they suddenly they just escalate until he finally is caught, because he's just killing. So there is a case to be made for that, but just so there's limited insight into Dahmer here. I think my complaint about the Derf side of things is that I felt oddly enough, for what's usually such an autobiographical thing, I don't get a lot of Derf out of this book. I get a lot of the kind of the truisms of oh, I was your regular teenage kid. It's I would have liked more particular of you in this book. And I don't know if that's a part of this, is he comes from a more reportage, a more editorial cartoon kind of standpoint, where he doesn't want to kind of bring himself into the picture. But it's my friend Dahmer, but I don't get a lot of him in the book, and I certainly don't get the sense that he was actually a friend or somebody who actually hung out with Dahmer. He was a part of a group of guys who adopted Dahmer as their pet freak and used him to play tricks, took him to a mall where for money, he went around and he caused disruptions, and he did things because they were tasteless, cruel children who saw something that was freakish and decided to exploit it. And unfortunately it doesn't really go into because it wasn't of Derf's experience. This is Derf saying this is what we did around it. He does mention stuff the teachers didn't seem to particularly notice him. It was the laissez-faire 70s where he could have he could be absent a lot. He could be drunk all the time. But no one was like, he's like, hey, we should help this kid. We should, why aren't we helping this kid? It's like, no, he's just, he's not causing too much of a disruption. So we're not going to get him. Actually, indeed, there's another kid in this book who does cause lots of disruptions, who there is a lot more intervention from the teachers. And indeed, when, Derf hears, oh my God, one of your, classmates, well, I'm not, it's just like, there's more about him, and actually there's more intervention with that kid because it's disruptive, whereas Dahmer is this blank slate shadow that kind of just passes through high school that nobody notices, and until it's far, far, far too late. I say on BookTube how, I enjoy this. I enjoy this because I get to kind of don't just like read a book and then okay, I'm going to put it aside. It's like I get to consider and ponder what I read, and I don't know if I really wanted to. I mean, the thing I did make a point of doing after I read this book is I went to the Wikipedia page and I just looked at the bare bone facts of what happened afterwards, because this book doesn't go into it other than allude to it. And if I wanted to I felt it was my duty as somebody to just say, okay, I should know what this person did. And I mean, Derf is very much of like the thing of like, look, as a kid, you can go like, there's a sympathy thing of like, somebody should have been here for Dahmer. And he says like, the second he was like, he killed someone, he should have turned himself in, or he should have killed himself. When he concealed that and decided to just go give in and just suck up as much of this as possible, suck up as much of this sick, horrible pleasure of killing people and having sex with their bodies. That's like the Dahmer surprise has lost anything for. This isn't a pleading for Dahmer. This is what Dahmer was. This is the Dahmer I knew. This is my reportage on it. I really wish that the book, in some ways, that's probably why I'm not a true crime guy, is because I sort of wish that this book was less about Dahmer, and more about the high school and about his friends and and just sort of like talking about how Dahmers walk around and nobody notices, or if they do notice, they go, I'm going to push it aside, which is, I mean, in some ways it's a part of that is I don't know if it's self-protective thing of like, I've read this book, I just want to get this review over with and push it aside. So yeah, I guess it works that way. It's a fascinating book. I don't think it's an entirely successful book. I almost feel like Dahmer shouldn't be the center. I think Dahmer should be back here where Derf is, and I think Derf should be in the front, explaining, talking about this particular place where it was a nest for someone like Dahmer, and making the point that it's a nest that is irregular, is us. I'm not like blaming his background for Dahmer. I think Dahmer that's a chemical, that thing, but it wasn't mitigated. And there's a good comment, there's a good thing there to be had about what about our society, our anodized society, that does not catch up people who, and this is the thing is like, okay, yeah, Dahmer, we should have helped Dahmer. So we should have helped all the people who didn't become serial killers, but had damaged sad lives because there wasn't teachers, or there wasn't parents, or there wasn't other adults helping them. It's a side benefit that maybe we'd also have less Dahmers in the world, but we'd also have other less broken and abandoned and discarded people in our world. So that's my reaction to my friend Dahmer, who there's no friends for Dahmer. No friends at all. Yeah. More videos later.